All right. I think I pressed all the right fancy buttons. So hopefully no music comes on to interrupt me, and hopefully people online can see me. Yeah, we got him muted. But you'll have to put up with the acoustic sounds of. Oh, you got to, Warren. You got to get him. That's right. I have yet to teach him that you've got to hold the sticks the other way around. What's that now? Well, we live down in Chassel, so I guess we. Oh, probably. Yeah. The real question will be whether we ever get a drum set for our house. Molly's shaking her head. You got one? Let's talk. In the pool. Oh, that's perfect. Garage band. We had drums when I was I think it was when I was in 6th or 7th grade. My parents got us a drum set, and we were so excited for it, And then my parents quickly realized they needed to set certain boundaries. Yeah, they had to say, okay, you can only play on these certain times, and then they kept shrinking. But no, it's fun. That's right. That's right. That's also if ever I'm having a hard time hearing prayer requests in church, it's probably because of those years of drumming in the basement with the boombox all the way charged up. Right on. Well, glad to see you guys. Oh, okay, we're good. Phew. Yeah, we're good. Yeah, good to have you here. Shane, double check my button pressing. Did I do a good job? Perfect. I'll take it. Hey, that's right. I'm improving, I think. All right. Well, just like the last couple weeks here, we've been kind of focusing in on the text of the day, sort of breaking it up into almost mini small group research in the text before we come back together and then share insights and questions that we have of the text. But before we do any or all of that, let's just begin in a word of prayer. Hey? Dear Jesus, we thank you that you invite us to come into this time and this place, to come into your space, so that you might teach us, grow wisdom in us, so that you might reveal to us even the path to life. We believe that it's in you, Jesus, and it's in your word. And so we ask you now that you would send your Spirit to be among us, direct our thoughts and our conversation to the truths that you have prepared for us this day in your word. All this we ask in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right. So if you haven't been with us the last couple weeks, I think you've had various teachers, perhaps. I was one of them recently. Here I am again today, and glad to be here. So, what we'll do is, if you hopefully grabbed a sheet on your way in and a writing utensil, we're just going to break out into smaller groups for the first two sections, okay? So that first read and the identify the people. Buddy up with a couple people. Get close, get comfy, don't be nervous. Everyone's nice. Yeah, everyone that I know in this room is nice. There's some people I don't know that well, so I can't speak for them. No, I'm just kidding, Judy. Take time. We'll plan for about 7 minutes. It's a pretty big section of text. So 7 minutes on first read and identify the people, and then we'll come back and share our insights. And I will come join a group as well. See you in 7. All right, I don't know if that went super fast for you guys. It did for us. What's that? You're on verse 2? Hey, nice. Awesome. Well, maybe we'll do some of this. It's okay. We can digest some of this as a group as well. Yeah, I realized, though, when I sat down, like we were at 9, I actually went to 9 minutes, and I was like, man, I feel like we could talk a lot more about this. But maybe just in your groups, whether it's verse 1 to verse 31, what's jumped out at you about this text? Or any questions or insights your group had? Yeah, Jim.
The importance of context. What came up here was we were familiar with 10 through 31,
Mm-hmm.
but the piece that probably in the past got overlooked is the advice of mother to son.
Ah, uh-huh, uh-huh.
It was just this laundry list of, be the perfect wife. If she can't be found, here's what a woman must achieve.
Mm-hmm,
All
mm-hmm.
this in a 24-hour day. So,
Sure.
but the reframing of it as, no, this is the king's mother kind of guiding him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was drawn out in our group as well, and it sort of hit me as similar to you guys familiar with the verse that says, wives submit to your husbands? Remember that in Ephesians chapter 5? Do you remember that context as well? So that's Paul writing to the church at Ephesus, and he's giving instructions to wives and husbands. And people typically remember, wives submit to your husbands. And there's probably some dubious reasons as to why that's the one verse that everyone remembers, because Paul goes on in a much longer section in chapter 5 to talk about what the man is expected to do for the wife, right? But unfortunately, there have been, whether it's a person who reads it and is sort of like, maybe they're already off put by Christianity, or religion, and they hear this and they think it's just an oppressive sort of thing, or if it's actually voices from within the church cherry picking things and sort of applying it without larger context, both of those can be damaging, right? Well, yeah, what else maybe in that first 9 verses stood out to you? Sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're reading into sort of like, okay, here's the instruction, but why is this the particular instruction he's receiving? So talking about what, verse 5 and kind of the whole thing, huh? Well, and maybe it's worth just sitting on that for a moment. And, we don't, Lemuel, this is the only time he shows up in the scriptures. There's some theories as to who this person might be. His name means dedicated to God or belonging to God. And so maybe the mother had dedicated, maybe this was her firstborn son and dedicated him to Yahweh. But in any case, is that kind of instruction, so we don't know how old Lemuel is. But let's think, for instance, if he's a young man. What do you make of this, instruction in these 9 verses? Is that applicable to young men, would you say?
Well, if you had a responsible job like he was king,
Yeah.
and you had a big responsibility, then you want to take care that you don't do anything that will damage your ability to make good decisions.
Do you think that's applicable only to those who are kings?
No. But in his case, it could be especially damaging if he didn't take care.
Yeah, the stakes are
It
higher.
could be damaging the rest of the country.
Right, the stakes are higher for him, particularly as a leader.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then I live my life, and I've come all these years, and here's what I sort of realized. Hey, Mom knew a thing or two, right? That's also similar, depending on if you read Ecclesiastes, as, and not all scholars do, but it sort of attributes it to King Solomon, right? And, he writes in that piece of literature all these things that he's gone out, he's done them, and he's saying, now listen up. Here was the result of it, all right? I've got something to teach you, to tell you. And it's maybe like, I don't know, it seems almost like the irony of wisdom in some ways, right? Like as a young person, it's really hard to accept wisdom from an outside source. You know what I'm saying? Like it's really hard to, mom and dad say something, and you just say, I 100% agree with you, and I'm going to live my life in accordance with that. Yeah, exactly. But then, you live some life, and you do start to say, hey, man, Dad said something about this once, or Mom, I remember when Mom was, I guess she was right all along. Any other questions or insights that y'all picked out in this section? Yeah, Alex.
What's verse 6 and 7 about then?
Alex, tell me, what do you think? So we're looking at verses 6 and 7. So previously, it's sort of this instruction to, Lemuel, or to young men, probably stay away from, partying if you're going to try and live up to your vocation well. But all of a sudden, it sort of flips, and it says, give drink. What's the context there that it's encouraging? In what context is it saying, give drink?
Or like comfort care, or hospice care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because at that point, they're not making decisions that are affecting lots of other people, because they're no longer working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a medicinal context, right? Go ahead, Warren, did you have?
That just illuminated to me what the point is, because that was really, I was wondering about that.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, it's prescription
Yeah,
in a way, right?
yeah.
And when you mentioned hospice, that's very familiar with for me. My wife just went through it, and you want to keep them comfortable.
Mm.
And in those days, alcohol certainly was a means of calming.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this group we talked about that. So,
Yeah,
very
would be
good.
what they had available.
Right, it's what was available as a calming drug.
Mm-hmm. And kind of a comfort to us, I think, today in terms of hospice, decisions. It's interesting to see that laid out here, even in the biblical text, that there's a precedent for this. So it's, don't drink these things just for your own, pleasure. Don't be self-serving, if you will, but by all means use it for the sake of neighbor. Well, let's maybe move down. I want to keep us moving so we can get to the cross references. And let's just name the people in the proverb and see if there's any other comments we might have for each of them. So we talked about Lemuel, right? This son, king, whose name means dedicated or belonging to God. What other characters are in this whole section?
His mother, of course.
Yeah, his mother. And it's worth noting that word oracle there, it says an oracle that his mother taught him. That word in the Hebrew Scriptures always refers to divine inspiration. So it's like the oracle, Amos saw regarding, so it's like in prophetic literature, it's always something that God is revealing for someone to speak. Yep.
On the husband and wife. In the thing, the actual husband and wife that we're talking about.
Yep. Okay, so if we move down below, we have the excellent woman and the husband. Yeah.
Does that mean that then oracles necessarily are kind of reserved to the prophets? Is there a correlation there?
Well, just that term that's used, would indicate it's not just like a piece of advice from somebody, but actual divine inspiration. Yep, that's what that term denotes. Yep. So kind of like the difference between like in the New Testament, which I always have trouble with. Remember when Paul's like, this isn't the Lord telling you this is just Paul telling you this. But then it's still in the Bible. So I'm like, wait, so how do we understand that? But anyways, you know, this isn't, what he received from his mother wasn't just advice. The way it's written here, the verb that's used, would indicate this is godly wisdom. And perhaps, given the direction that it goes in terms of what sort of things she counts as wisdom, perhaps it's not surprising that it would be congruent with wisdom of God, right?
In other words, it's his mother passing that God's wisdom on to him.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a focus on, kind of following the whole Deuteronomy piece, right? Like raising up my children in the way of Yahweh. Yep.
Well, it's interesting you've got merchants in there too, because he mentioned merchants several times, that she sells things to merchants, and, so there's buying and selling.
Mm-hmm.
Buying property and selling goods, and as a way to support your family, because he mentioned for money she earned, she bought that field.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's worth bringing up, Marilyn. Just maybe in contrast to if this text has ever been preached or used in sort of a way to maybe minimize the woman's role, right? Now, I understand it's possible to read it and sort of feel like, well, this is just a bunch of more stuff now that the woman has to do. But when you read those verses, don't you get the sense that there's a certain amount of maybe trust and autonomy that the woman has, right? It's not sort of like she's having to do all these things because her husband told her to do them, but actually there's such a trust relationship between the two that she's able to go and do this. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. So we see, what's that? The quartet of the vulnerable is a term that sometimes gets used to talk about the immigrants, the poor, the widows, and orphans in the Scripture. So those four categories show up all the time in the Scriptures, and God always has this compassionate heart towards those groups, right? And he sort of says to his people, be people who tend to them, who care for them. And so, yeah, we see them pop up not only right there in verses 8 and 9, these instructions to King Lemuel, but then even in the description of the excellent woman, right? Verse 20, she opens her hand to the poor and reaches her hands out to the needy. So we kind of see that reflected in both King Lemuel and the excellent wife. Well, let's move on to these cross-reference passages. So feel free, actually, can I take volunteers to just like select different ones of these? Would someone take Deuteronomy 17:17? Joe, you got that? Leviticus 19. Anyone up for Leviticus? Jean, great. Ruth 3:11. Who wants Ruth? Jim, thank you. Jim's got Ruth. Jim, you mind taking both Ruth ones? Cool. Romans 12. Pemberton, yep. Jane, you can take that. And then Proverbs, well, I guess we're right there, aren't we? Oh, no, well, Proverbs 1:7. Dale, did you want that one? Right on. All right, so, Joe, hit us with Deuteronomy 17. What you got? All right, so this verse from the Deuteronomy 17, and it's advising against acquiring many wives, Joe, and gold and silver. How does that connect to this Proverbs 31 passage? What's that, Judy? Yeah, great. So Proverbs 31 is sort of celebrating one wife, not necessarily a multitude of wives. And it is interesting in the Old Testament, polygamy was common, right? It's not uncommon. And it's never explicitly said, it's never said, don't do this, don't have multiple wives. But if you read narratively, every time someone has multiple wives, I can tell you how it goes. Not good. Not once. It never works well. So kind of interesting that even in that ancient culture, even though this was kind of an accepted practice, you might say, like the passage we heard from Jesus in Matthew this morning, where he's teaching on marriage and divorce, right? And saying the two become one flesh. You sort of get this sense that from the beginning, God always intended it to be one woman, one wife, and anything outside of that sort of breaks it down.
I read something last night about David, and they mentioned that David had lots of wives and concubines, and this comment was, it was a totally dysfunctional family.
Yeah, well, and it certainly caused, if you read the narrative of David, like especially with his sons, there becomes all sorts of drama and difficulty and heartbreak that results as a result of that. Yes, exactly. So Solomon, even though, and that's the interesting thing, if he wrote Ecclesiastes, right? He goes out and he experiences all this stuff and says, don't do it, right? It's vanity. You're wasting your time. And then he still falls prey to it in his own life. And maybe there is we don't know the timeline of those things. Maybe he sort of experienced the downfall of his actions and then commented so that future generations could learn of his wisdom. But yeah, so what's that? We hope so. Well, that's just it, isn't it? There's a big difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? We can know a lot of things, but to actually put it into practice is very different. But yeah, so when you're reading the king's narrative of Solomon, if you're familiar with the Torah, Deuteronomy, you say, wait a minute, this isn't good. Here's some bad foreshadowing. And it comes right at the beginnings of 1 Kings 3, that same chapter with his wisdom. And just to point it out, that same instruction is here in 31 to Lemuel, right? In verse 3, right? So when it says, do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy kings, it's not saying, hey, women are evil, and they're going to be, contrary to some thinkers, then they're going to be your downfall. But it's guarding against, what is, you might say, what is a common weakness for men, especially men in positions of power. And it's, we don't have kings, but you can look at people in power today and see the same sort of weakness, right? And it's not wise. It becomes their undoing. Well, let's go to Leviticus 19. Who had that one for us? And how do we see that one come into play here in Proverbs 31? Yeah. Yeah, so being not partial, and typically partiality is going to be towards those who probably have means. Other sections of Scripture say, like, don't accept a bribe, right? But to those who don't have means, to be especially thoughtful towards them, to consider them. Good. All right, we'll go kind of out of order here. Well, no, we'll just do Ruth 3. We'll do Ruth 3:11 for now, Jim. Okay, so if you were in early service, then you probably heard Aaron's allusion to the book of Ruth. And how does that line, especially that last line about Ruth being a worthy woman, how does that connect to Proverbs 31? Wait, tell me more, Jason. Help my mind catch up to yours. Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, I'm with you. So this is not a rhetorical question. There's a real answer. Yeah, so Boaz found Ruth, and that phrase, I believe Aaron mentioned in his sermon that an excellent wife, it's the same Hebrew words as you are a worthy woman in Ruth. So those two phrases are identical in the Hebrew scriptures. And so Ruth, so if we want to do a case study on, well, what is the life of this excellent wife that they're talking about in Proverbs 31, we could read the story of Ruth. Romans, who had our Romans 12 passage? Jean? Okay. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. I cheated and I worked ahead earlier on this, and this was the one that I had the hardest time connecting the dots. How do you see that phrase or that verse from Romans connecting to this passage?
Well, she talks about caring for her household.
Ah,
They were talking about the saints of God or the household of God, and she's preparing for the household for winter and, taking care of the saints within that household at least.
sure.
And then the poor,
Yeah,
and among them could be some things too.
sure. Yeah, well, in I guess I hadn't thought of it either, but that now you draw my attention to verse 15. It's, not even her own children, but even her maidens. So there's that that hospitable factor even to those who are employed under her. Yeah, sorry for the drum show. This was another line that maybe connects this idea, and it was one of the questions I had as I read through it, but when it said, her lamp does not go out at night, I was just curious what that phrase meant, and I had interpreted it to mean, well, she's like a workaholic, she's just...
Foolish virgins in the one Bible scripture.
Oh.
They were supposed to be with the bridegroom and their lamps all were going out.
That's right. Well, and that is the parallel in the sense that in both of these stories, Proverbs 31 and that parable, it's having the oil, right? So when it says her lamps do not go out at night, it doesn't mean that she's up 24/7 doing things. It just means because of her success, she's able to keep oil burning in her home so that if people had to get up in the night, they could see where they were going, type of a thing. So she's very hospitable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so is that a little bit of a contrast, do you feel? Yeah. I mean, those are, well, I suppose it's a Venn diagram, right? You can have saints who are also poor and needy, but you can also have poor and needy who are not part of the fold of God, if you will.
In this context, do they mean the elderly of the church when they say the saints?
In Romans 12, in that passage. Well, let's head over there.
I mean, obviously, we're not talking about the deceased who tended to their needs.
Mm-hmm. We'll read some context. I had a SEM professor who always told me if I had a question in a particular text, he said, do this. Like, keep reading, So here, let me just read. This is under the section Marks of a True Christian. And it follows Paul's encouragement to be a living sacrifice. So I'm just starting at verse 9. Let love be genuine, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Well, yeah, I mean, to me, I don't hear it giving a particular demographic within the sainthood, but sort of like the Acts 2 picture, right? The whole community of believers had everything in common, and no one had need. Now, we lived very differently than the picture we get of the Acts 2 community, in the sense that, we're not all living in like a commune together, right? We all have our individual lives. Yet, the church is to be a place where there is that care for one another, right? And hopefully you're aware of this, but at this church there even is a benevolence fund for those who come on hard times, that they can come and say, hey, this or that is going on, we really need help. And we have historically done that for different folks who have come asking for that help, basically as a living out of this caring for the needs of the saints. Yeah. Ah, yeah. Physically, could be shoveling snow. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, and it's good to point out that it's not as if the needs are always age dependent in that sense. I mean, you can have a person of any age who comes on hard times or is going through something difficult, and whether it's financial or not, hopefully the church can be a place for help.
And I think in this context, maybe I don't think just recent life experiences and friends that have passed away. It's not necessarily about your age. It's about your independence, your mobility,
Mm.
all those things where you start to say, I'm finally at that chapter of life.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know people that are. I mean, Nicole's dad's 87, and other than some feet issues, he still gets around like any of us.
Right.
But I had a neighbor that I took care of 4 or 5 years ago, where everything was insured at that last year or two of his life, and at that point, you definitely need your neighbors to look out for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that has kind of been, one of the brightest lights of the Christian community since ancient times. So, like, there's a quote from 1st, 2nd century where it says, the Greeks take care of the Greek poor and the Romans take care of the Roman poor, but the Christians take care of them all. Likewise, when the plague was happening, people just fled the cities, right? They just got out of there. But Christians were actually going into the city. They were caring for those who were, they weren't even supposed to touch, for fear of getting the plague. And they were caring for those people. And that, historians believe that's one of the reasons Christianity had such a surge in like the 3rd, 4th century, was because of that demonstration. I mean, when you're giving your life, basically, for the sake of your neighbor, it speaks, Yeah. Well, we're going to hit Ruth. Let's hit Ruth 4:1 and then Proverbs 1:7, and then we'll draw some final conclusions. Jim, you got us on Ruth 4?
Now Boaz had gone, this is Boaz redeeming Ruth. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down.
So here we go. This one's another, maybe a stretch, but it is connected to Proverbs 31.
Verse 23, what's the correlation there, brother?
Oh, yeah, I didn't even realize it was like we got cheat codes here. So verse 23, her husband is known in the gates. So Boaz there was going into the gates, the entryway where matters were settled. So I guess it seems to be suggesting, the Proverbs 31 chapter, that the excellent wife also has excellent taste for herself, right, in who her spouse is going to be. Just like the encouragement is for, a man to find a woman of such standing, or, who embodies some of these characteristics, I think the encouragement is for women also to say, hey, know your value. Don't settle for someone who's not going to be represented there at the gates, right? Settle for someone who's also taking care of business, who's meeting together with the elders, that sort of an instruction. Mm. Mhm. Right, if you're one of the maidens listed in the text, right? Mhm. Mhm. A pr-
Finding another servant that also believes in God, and even if they weren't wealthy.
ah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. So appropriate it as is useful, right? Yeah. All right, well, let's look at Proverbs 1:7. And Dale, did you have that one? Ah, okay, so there's the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Yeah. And I think this is a great place for us to end on. But let's chew on it for a minute. What does that mean, do you think? What does it mean for the fear of the Lord to be the beginning of wisdom? Does it mean that people out there who are not Christians have zero wisdom? Mm-hmm. 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 Very good. Yeah, okay. I like that, Dale. So there's a certain respect for being a creature and not creator that is going to be beneficial to me in my life, right? And probably to others around me. See, because I would say, I would postulate that there's tons of people who aren't Christians that have tons of wisdom, plenty of wisdom. But if you're thinking in an ultimate sense, right? Say I have all sorts of wisdom, but I reject that there is a God. If I have no absolute foundation for what I choose to do or not do in my existence, then I might have all sorts of wisdom that help increase the bounty of my life, right? That give me power or connections. But it's hard for me to imagine using those things in a way that will not be destructive to myself or others without that fear, right? Without that respect. Because as you say, Dale, it's just maybe the only way it comes out is I don't totally blow up my existence, I don't use the things I have for super self-destructive or destructive of others ways, but when I walk around the world, and see, no one could see this, but I could walk around and say, yeah, I'm better than you. Yeah, I'm better than you. Yeah, I'm better than you. I'm better than everyone in the room. Because look at everything I have. Look at how well my life has gone. And I could still come off in a way, like no one's going to say that. Well, some people say that out loud. But you can have that all hidden inside. And so even if everything on the exterior looks seemingly wise, that soul is destroyed, right? It's a rejection of God. It's no fear of God because it says, I am the creator of my life. Yeah. Yeah, so on the flip side, I would say just as we go, let's do our best not to hear Proverbs 31 or Ephesians 5 or even Romans 12 when we were reading it. I'm thinking, well, crap, I can't live up to this either, There's all these, the Bible sets a high bar. And the point of that is not to set something that God doesn't want to happen. But the gospel piece of it, and this is the other part of the fear of the Lord, is that I just read this. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity, when he says, Jesus, when he says, be perfect, therefore, as my Father in heaven is perfect, C.S. Lewis says, he meant what he said. But he says the difference is he's going to work it in and through you. It's not a bar that you hit in order to be accepted by him, but by accepting Jesus in your life, you might think, I've got these few things I need to clean up in my life, and maybe Jesus can help with that. He's not going to stop there, right? He's going to continue to refine until ultimately, when we're in the new creation, we are perfect as his Father in heaven is perfect. So Jesus goes with you. This is not a bar for you to complete for him, but is rather maybe a perfect picture of what he is seeking to work through our lives. So let's pray the Lord's Prayer, and then we will roll. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thanks, guys.